Thus, Preston counters Wong's frame of Asian American studies and Sorgenfrei's frame of Japanese studies, arguing that Ito never saw himself in these terms, but rather pursued, quote, strategic cultural syncretism and strategic Orientalism. Wong, Sorgenfrei, and Preston all cite influential theorists of globalization in their work, from Arjun Appadurai and Kwame Anthony Appiah to Mary Louise Pratt and Jahan Ramazani. While these theorists typically use literature as illustration, scholars of Ito confront the challenge of how to translate these theorists into usable methods for dance studies. Taken together, their approach is model methods for tracing corporeal and intellectual exchange across multiple registers and for situating these exchanges within overlapping local contexts. Early 20th century Tokyo, London during the First World War, New York during the 1920s, Los Angeles during the 1930s, and Japanese internment during the Second World War. In many ways, scholarly approaches to Ito's career parallel other recent inquiries on individual artists in transit. Michelle Clayton has followed the Spanish-British dancer Tortola Valencia on her tours of Latin America from 1916 to 1930, highlighting how local critics of her performances, aware that audiences across Europe and the Americas also had witnessed her dancing, projected their own positions within transnational networks. Clayton understands this not as, quote, modernist cosmopolitanism, but as comparative particularisms performed by moving bodies and resignified by their shifting publics. Kate Elswit has followed both Kurt Jooss and Valeska Garrett from their involuntary exile during the Nazi years to their voluntary remigrations to Germany following the Second World War. She proposes the idea and method of the, quote, micropolitics of exchange, again, an idea that resonates with this conference, the, quote, intricate, personalized cross-currents catalyzed by survival strategies that registered in the work itself and left traces in history, both marked and unmarked, close quote. Thus, Elswit challenges an earlier conception of exile studies that highlights one-way movement away from Germany rather than a complex network of movements even back to Germany as well as from country to country. Like the scholars of Ito, Elswit traces migrants' complex moves after leaving home. What Elswit and Clayton share with Wong, Sorgenfrei, and Preston is a determination to account for the multiple networks of production and reception that dancers encounter and alter as they cross national borders. Embodiment, pedagogy, and person-to-person transmission become central to these border crossings. If the local provides one alternative to the historiography of the nation state, then the regional provides another. Here, the book that I called before, The Single Best History of the Transnational, The Modernist World, co-edited by Stephen Ross and Alana Lindgren, exemplifies this regional approach with entries on dance, alongside the other arts in sections devoted to East and Southeast Asia, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Australia and Oceania, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Arab world, and Canada and the United States. In contrast to Selma Jean Cohen's International Encyclopedia, there is no implicit progress narrative. Rather, the years before the 1970s are considered fascinating in their own right as dancers, practices, and ideas ceaselessly cross borders. Also, in contrast to the International Encyclopedia, dance modernism is not divorced from social, popular, indigenous, folk, and traditional dance. On the contrary, many of the essays demonstrate the ways that diverse genres mingle and fuse in dance modernism. In modern dance in East and Southeast Asia, for example, Jukka Miettinen notes that the term modern in the region can mean either artists who are in direct contact with the Western modernist dance movement or the westernization of dance that started earlier in Asia than the modern dance movement evolved in Europe and the United States during the first half of the 20th century. He holds that, quote, the various strategies of negotiation between the indigenous traditions and modernist tendencies account for, quote, the present pluralism and richness of Asia's contemporary dance scene. In the essay Dance in South Asia, Ketu Katrak relies on Charles Taylor's concept of multiple modernities to plot modern dance in the region as a palimpsest of old and new, traditional and contemporary. Focusing on India and its diaspora, Katrak sees influences traveling from east to west to east. In the choreography of Meeni Devi, influenced by Pavlova on tour, Madame Manaka, influenced by St. Denis, and Asta Dibu, influenced by Murray Lewis. In contrast, Chandralekha, who trained in Bharatanatyam, rejected the superficial religiosity, over-ornamentation, and reliance on epic stories and myths in favor of abstraction. And in this way, her cross-fertilization of traditions within India empowered several generations of innovators in India, Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. Essays in the volume on Africa and Latin America also highlight the interplay of indigenous traditions and modernist tendencies. In Modernism and African Dance, Reinventing Traditions, Kyriamu Welsh describes how African dance companies served as cultural ambassadors for newly independent African countries and thus ushered in a wave of African dance to Europe and the West. These companies constructed a national culture in Ghana, Guinea, and Senegal by adapting dances from various ethnic and tribal groups for stage presentation. Welsh emphasizes the intellectual and financial patronage extended to dance companies by leaders such as Leopold Senghor, the first president of Senegal, and Fodebo Keita, the first minister of the Interior in Guinea. In racialized dance modernisms in Latin America, Jose Reynoso demonstrates the role that race and class played in constructing dance modernisms in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Mexico. He explains how, quote, as dancers relied on ballet, modern dance, and indigenous and Africanist forms of expressive culture while participating in the formation of hybrid national identities, they simultaneously naturalized hierarchies of racialized class relations while marking and indigenizing whiteness. Strikingly, the essays on modern dance in Europe and the United States and the modernist world, the centers posited in the earlier historiography, radically revised the historiography in the nation state. The co-editor, Alana Lindgren, writes a fascinating essay paralleling modern dance developments in both the US and Canada, remarkably histories that have not been told together before. In the essay Inventing Abstraction, Modernist Dance in Europe, Juliette Bello and Nell Andrew take as their starting point a 2012 exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City that included Nijinsky, Laban, and Wigman in a narrative of how abstraction developed in modern art. Critiquing the show for grafting images of and by the three artists onto an existing master narrative, they offer a counter-history of abstraction that includes a broader range of dancers: Fuller, Duncan, Valentine de Saint-Point, Sophie Tauber, Oscar Schlemmer, and the Ballet Suede Ra, and this counter-history that promises, quote, to redefine the central principle of modernism. In their counter-history, dance does not simply reflect the modes of abstraction created in the visual arts, but demonstrates, quote, how actual bodies, bodily surrogates or images, and tactile or kinesthetic sensations all played key roles in the urge to abstraction. So taken together, the essays in the modernist world dismantle the narrative of centers and peripheries that structure the history of modern dance in the International Encyclopedia. Yet there remains much work to be done before we achieve a fully rounded account of modern dance in transnational circulation. At present, we have a wide array of new studies, but few accounts that attempt to synthesize, compare, and map the transnational history.